Okay, this is your reading guide for Chapter 2 of Outliers, the 10,000 Hour Rule. In this chapter, Gladwell tells us an interesting story about several successful people in many different fields, and goes on to tell us what these individuals and groups have in common. He's going to talk about people like Bill Joy, one of the most successful and first software designers of the computer age. And this can get a little confusing because he also talks about another giant in the computer industry, Bill Gates, who some say is one of the most successful people of all time. He's the founder of Microsoft, and now, as you probably know, one of the richest men in all of history. So, as you read, don't get confused. We're talking about two bills, both in the computer industry and the rise of the computer industry. One is Bill Joy and one is Bill Gates. Try to keep them separated in your mind. But Gladwell is going to present an interesting idea to us about these two guys and about why they were uniquely set up to be successful in the personal computer boom. And that has a lot to do with access they had that no one else had growing up. This, believe it or not, is a picture of a computer lab when Bill Joy and Bill Gates were growing up. And it's hard to imagine, but this room full of machines does less than what the phone in your pocket is able to do. But at the time, this was cutting edge technology, and very few people in the world had access to these computers. Not only that, but hardly any kids, any high school kids, middle school kids, had access to this kind of technology at all. In fact, you could say there were just about a handful, two of which included Bill Gates and Bill Joy. When they were born, and having access to these kinds of computers growing up for hours on end gave these two the edge that they needed to become successful. Gladwell is going to show us how these two men were able to spend over 10,000 hours working with computers and technology that no one else could have spent in their age range, and that this was a key factor to their success. He's not only going to talk about these two, but he's going to give us lots of other evidence and examples. He's going to argue that this 10,000 hour rule applies to the great composer Mozart, who started composing when he was very young, one of the youngest composers of all time. But it's widely acknowledged that some of his greatest works came out later on in his career. That in fact Mozart's success is because as a kid and growing up he had all this time to develop his skills and to hone his craft, and that he spent more than 10,000 hours working and composing and doing music, and this led to his greatness. Not only Mozart, but the Beatles. The Beatles are widely viewed as the most successful and popular musical group in all of history. And this is a picture of the Beatles before they were the Beatles that you have seen, maybe in popular images such as this. This is a picture of the Beatles when they were teenagers, where they played in a nightclub in Hamburg, Germany, night after night after night for hours on end, and developed as a group of young musicians. They did not start out as the Beatles, this greatest band of all time, but a bunch of kids that had the opportunity to practice and play for hours and hours on end. In fact, Gladwell points out for over 10,000 hours, this group of guys got to play together. And Gladwell argues that this is why the Beatles met their success. He doesn't stop there. He also examines some of the wealthiest people in all of history. And he'll show us how these successful people have some things strangely in common, from their birth date to their opportunity. And he's going to suggest that the time and place and opportunity that you have in the place that you are leads to your success. Gladwell's goal in this chapter is to point out some flaws and some myths in how we think about success most of the time. Many of us believe success is simply based on this natural talent, that some people have it and some people don't. Well, he's going to blow that out of the water with the 10,000 hour rule. And he's going to start to suggest to us that maybe some success is able to be sped up because of the opportunities that some people have and are able to take, such as even the year that you're born and the circumstances of culture and what's happening in industry, and that all these things can affect a person's success. So, your reading schedule is as follows. As you finish this video, before our next class, you need to read sections 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 2 on your own and complete the reading guide. When we get to class, we'll read sections 4 and 5 of chapter 2 together, and we'll work on the reading guide together for those sections. Finally, after class, we will read section 6 of chapter 2 and complete the reading guide for homework there. Before you read, there's some things you need to take into account. You're going to want to make sure that you know the following strategies. You might need to review some of these, look at your notes, watch lesson videos, do whatever you need to do to make sure you know these strategies, because the reading guide is going to ask you for some of these. Things like imagery, similes, allusions, rhetorical questions, anecdotes, connotation, logos, pacing, humor, forced teaming, hyperbole, and even footnotes. Another thing that's really helpful in this section is that you know a little bit about history as well. You might want to brush up on what's happening in America during the 1860s and 1870s. Things like the railroad expansion, the emergence of Wall Street and the Industrial Revolution, as well as what happened in 1975 with the introduction of the mini computer. He's going to suggest that these are important dates and important periods, and you need to know a little bit about them. While you read, you need to make sure to fill in your reading guide as you go. Think about that rhetorical triangle in the writer's craft. Use a dictionary or dictionary.com to find the meaning of words you don't know. That's the best way to expand your vocabulary. And make sure you're thinking about what argument Gladwell is making and what kind of evidence he uses to support it. Finally, after you read, we're going to discuss a few things. I want you to start thinking about now. What are you approaching expert level on? Think about how you've spent most of your life to this point in your life. What do you think are the things you've spent almost 10,000 hours doing besides sleep? What would you like to become an expert at, and how long do you think it will take you to reach that level according to Gladwell? And then what opportunities do you have around you you may not have paid attention to before? These are all things that we're going to discuss, so be thinking about that as you read. Good luck.